I'd like to say a few thank yous on behalf of the League. First, the League is grateful to our host for this evening's event, the Cooper Union Irwin S. Chanin School of Architecture. And this program is supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council and the New York State Council on the Arts, with the support of Governor Andrew Cuomo and the New York State Legislature. And the League additionally likes to thank its members whose support help make this possible and all of our programs possible. So now a few words about tonight's speaker. Tonight, the Architectural League is pleased to welcome Julie Eizenberg to kick off this year's current work series. For the League, it's a coming home of sorts, as Julie is a distinguished alum of the League's 1990 class of Emerging Voices. As many of you know, Julie is a principal of the firm KoningEizenberg, which she founded in 1981 with her husband, Hank Koning. Since then, Julie and Hank have been joined by two additional principals, Brian Lane and Nathan Bishop. Now, I make the point to mention Brian and Nathan's names, as my guess is that's what Julie would do. She'd be among the first to acknowledge that architecture is a team sport and that the bench is deep. And she wouldn't hesitate to correct me if I didn't convey that properly. That's two of the many reasons to admire Julie. She doesn't want more credit than she deserves, and she's clear and forthright about her point of view. Julie and Hank hail originally from Melbourne. You'll recognize the lovely Australian accent when Julie comes to the podium. Although they had, by all accounts, a lively and promising initiation into the profession in Melbourne, they left Australia to study far away at UCLA, and they have been based in Los Angeles ever since. It's in Los Angeles that they built their practice and raised their family. And when I say raised their family, I don't just mean raised their kids. It's where they cultivated and raised their architectural practice, and in many ways cultivated and raised their clients too. Bringing up or bringing along clients is an important part of what Julie and her partners do as architects, and they do it very well. Julie has embraced small projects that initially didn't seem to have much opportunity for architecture, and yet over time has found a way to tease meaningful spaces and experiences out of the driest of programs. Diligence, careful and persistent effort has been her path to ingenuity. It's no accident that a large portion of KoningEizenberg's work is in and around Los Angeles. For those projects, they are local architects in the best sense. They see themselves as participants in, as well as advocates for, their community. Deep and ongoing engagement with client groups, be it for a branch library or an affordable housing development, is not a necessary evil for Julie and her partners. Rather, that rowdy, exciting, exhausting, fascinating process is the very essence of who they are as architects. I think if KoningEizenberg had a motto, my guess is it would be, bring it on. Julie has often spoken about architecture as a social medium, and it surely is. I would add that for her, it's also an oral medium. You learn through discussion, you teach through discussion, you form a sense of community through discussion, listening, and even arguing. I've had the pleasure of knowing Julie for many decades, and one of the things that consistently strikes me about her is the joy she takes in being an architect. It's not a bland cheeriness, but rather a deep satisfaction in moving things forward, figuring things out, and making things better. Now, for the most part, and this is a bit of a stereotype, architects can be a bit of a severe bunch. Angst seems to be an essential component of many architects' DNA. Now, angst can in its way bring value if it manifests itself as attention to detail or the sheer force of will, the perseverance that seems necessary to both becoming an architect and managing the constant challenges of being an architect. And Julie can obsess with the best of them, but somehow her innate sunniness keeps breaking through. Part of what propels her forward is her belief, in fact, her reliance on common sense. and not just the usual definition of common sense, meaning sound judgment. Importantly, she understands common sense to mean the opposite of self-interest. It's about a shared purpose, a common good. Julie has made an art of common sense and common sense of art. And with that, I give you Julie Eizenberg.
Hello, everyone, those I know and those I don't. And neither of you should be too judgmental. I'm the first in the series. So let's talk about neighborhood. I do. Okay, so we have some odd technology tonight. We'll see what happens. So LA neighborhoods are filling in. Not fast enough for all, but too fast for some. Development is propelled by a housing shortage and an improving transportation infrastructure. This is the new line that joins downtown back to the ocean. Okay. Oh, boy. So you can't see behind you, and I have my notes on the screen, and I'm completely confused. So watch this. Okay. So let's talk about housing. We have been studying neighborhood, and I'm not sure he's going to be able to help me with this technical problem. We have been studying neighborhood and housing for some time and collected what we learned into a series of broadsheets called Urban Hallucinations. The following handy-dandy quick look at the recent history of multi-unit housing is taken from that publication. Form and expression were, and still are, derived from the intersection of money, so speed and budget counts, evolving planning codes, particularly in relation to accommodating the car, a relatively untrained labor force, so nothing too precise, the limits of wood frame construction defined by evolving building codes, especially seismic regulations, and that is what's given form to LA multi-unit housing. Wood frame remains the most common and cheapest way to build housing in the region. I guess we're ahead of the curve on reducing carbon footprint. So you know about dingbats, you're going to learn more about six-packs, and you're going to learn more about podiums. So dingbats, you remember these guys? I'll go to the next picture, you'll know it then. Dingbats fill standard lots, approximately 50 by 150, with 2 stories of wood-framed apartments over tuck-under parking. And if I go to the next one, you'll see the kind of, they're expedient. Tuck-under parking is now what you call the soft story, but post-war, the car was becoming part of family life, and this is roughly a single-family house lot that is built to the max for multi-unit use, and it's brave and blustery about it. So it built to the setbacks. Let's get to six-packs. Six-packs are called six-packs because, I'm catching myself up, they basically sort of span over contiguous lots. They have a concrete platform and the cars are below, and because of the planning regulations, we're trying to fit more cars at this point in the 80s and the 90s, the city of LA made it permissible for you to have a half level of parking exposed above the ground. So we used to call this phenomenon cars in jail, and it's six-pack because it's 4/2. They look something like this. They're pretty, huh? So I'm having trouble getting the forward. Next. Yes, thank you. So there's the required parking, and it's doing the same game as a dingbat, but it's not as nostalgically, doesn't create any affection for anybody. Next. I did 2 builds to the property line, and where possible, it doesn't like to interrupt a form. Donuts are a specialty of the house if you get to enough lots. And you can see the guys next door have got further. So now we're at podiums. Well, podiums is good. Thank you. So podiums developed as the zoning in LA changed along boulevards, from allowing only commercial uses to allowing mixed-use housing. So retail happens on the ground floor, parking moves below grade. The land is too valuable for parking to take above grade zones. And then you can go 4 to 5 in wood, and it's a complicated story and you don't want to know about it, but that's the prototype. Next. And it gets to look like this. Next. So this is collage massing, and it's a great favorite among LA architects because it deflects some of the pushback from communities who want larger buildings to look smaller. I'm not sure why they think it's convincing, because it's not convincing built, it's not convincing drawn, but it gets people through the community and neighborhood councils. So it's a pretty boxy prototype. Part of the reason you're seeing thick walls is because shear walls are the cheapest way to do it, because we're in the seismic zone. The concrete line at the retail is there. You get the picture. So this is the context of LA. Next. You can see how it connects so delicately with its neighbors. Next. So yeah, LA has the picture postcard, but next, on the ground, it feels more like this. So that's the context that we're designing at this point in time, and many people are taking on construction methodology as a way of looking at what you can do. That's not necessarily our strongest area of interest, because I still think our interest is in the experience that you get, but it still gave us opportunities for formal and social invention. Next. Wow. I got ahead of myself. So, welcome to Santa Monica. Santa Monica is a city where we live. It was an early adapter on issues like sustainability and affordability. There is the light rail extension, which I showed you. Public transportation propels development. 500 Broadway, noted there, is a market rate development that we're working on that's in construction. And the ARROYO, just down the road, is the sister project and offers a city-required affordable inclusionary housing. And yeah, it's off-site. So before someone stands up and says, but what about the poor door? This is worse. Not one size fits all. In this case, and in many cases, and frankly I'd rather have the housing separate than not have it at all, off-site opened up more funding sources for the community components of the program. It delivered more units than required. It's 26% affordable of the total 500 Broadway number of, I think, 250 units. It offered a more conducive setting for the families that the not-for-profit partner wanted to house. At a certain point, interesting, income disparity inhibits formation of supportive community for this demographic. So it's not just about talking about our ideal idea of how everyone should live together, it's about trying to work out how it works to actually help people. Next. So you get a little, it's a bit jiggly because I was in charge of the tech and I'm not good at it, but it's 250 units, 160 units an acre, LEED Platinum, and it's in construction. This project's been going since about 2010, and I won't go through the entitlement process. What was great about it is it had a budget and a great developer, and that provided opportunity to push back on the conventions of the building type. I mean, it started by breaking the podium box. That's fantastic. Finally, a budget that we could do something like that. The facet and layered facade optimizes views and provides privacy and passive shading. The other one is it gave us time to think about, and actually Nathan, who was the project architect on this one, as well as my partner, time to think about what it was we needed to do to strengthen connections between home and street and in between, something he started calling sticky spaces. It's better to use thin buildings than donuts. Visible gardens make a difference, and a massing that carries the building to the ground helps unify home and street. Next. But I really want to talk to you about ARROYO in more detail. The ARROYO is the affordable housing. It's 64 units. It's about 80 units per acre. It was completed in 2018, and like 500 Broadway is LEED Platinum. Inclusionary housing by the city is required to be built very close to the the sponsoring project, and it, what was I going to say about that? And it needs to be, I'll come back to it. This double thing has got my brain working in ways that I can't control. Given the budgets for affordable housing, the crafting of place here embraces the limitations of wood frame boxy construction, and minimal secondary moves animate, a gestural angle, shading that provides amenity and ornament, and rippling rather than static grid approach to window placement. But like our work in the design framework is organized around the social and the sticky connection spaces. So let's back up a little. Next. So the site started life as an ARROYO, hence the name, became a train track. The red mark on over there is the site. And then in the 60s, it took on its fabulous role as, next, storm drain. It's a 9-foot, I think, wire diameter storm drain that takes water from LA out into Santa Monica Bay. That storm drain seriously impacted the site value for market rate development because it was difficult to fit the cars. Affordable housing requires less cars, and they were willing actually to pay extra per square foot for the parking underground to get a hold of the site. Next. So that storm drain's running through the middle. The courtyard is conceived as a social space for play and community spaces. It's a little new in this picture, but you get the idea. Next. A lot of thought goes into how that's planned, the kinds of spaces, and there's always a variety. And what you're looking at is a sort of structure. So it's a double-loaded hallway with an outdoor hallway between, and then a single-loaded hallway on the bottom, single-loaded housing there. And then the courtyard goes from street to the back of the lot. Parking comes in on that side. Next. So 64 families live here, right, with 63 cars and 128 bicycles. And that's great, but it would be really great if we were allowed to mess with the plans a little more. But the overlapping regulations on affordable housing keep housing plans fairly standard. Next. And this is a reminder that it's wood frame construction. Next. So the next sticky connection between, well, the first one is between home and the community spaces in the building. The second one is between the building and the street. So as you saw from that first slide, Lincoln Boulevard, where this building is filling in. By the time they fill in Lincoln Boulevard with a whole bunch of donuts, a through space will make a big connection of borrowed landscape between the project and the street. Next. So none of this is real glamorous. It's all kind of well, thank you for the common sense word, common sense. It's all kind of common sense. Next. So I'm just sort of moving you through next. We found the bridges are really great. The kids like to play between. They haven't yet thrown missiles from them, but it's going to happen. Next. Back to the idea of the ornament. Next. Moving to the back of the lot and through again. Next. Next. About a mile down the street are the ASHLAND apartments. They're 10 units at 30 units an acre with one affordable unit. We have looked at high-end and at affordable and figured I should slip in a model that could be missing middle housing. It could be missing middle housing, save that the short supply of housing and high land prices make the units more expensive than anyone would want them to be. But they do address the issue of intermediate density, and 30 units per acre is a lot better than 4, which is single-family housing. And there's a need. Next. So our strategy, well, the first strategy for that site, which is how we got the job, was the architect got fired because he did a conventional block and the neighbors went ballistic. It is Santa Monica, you get the picture. And if I go back, can I go before and go back one? So it's wrapped on 3 sides by single-family housing, and then the zone below the project there is zoned for mixed-use boulevard development, and it will be higher than the building. And the neighbors were not keen on what was going in there, so we got to try it another way. Next. So as I said, we parsed it up into 4 blocks. It had more exterior wall, but cost offset by eliminating the need for an elevator took care of that. Accessible units are available on the entry level and screen the parking garage. I think there's a... That's these guys. And then above on the podium level, those units are exempt from requiring accessible access. So we took our cues from the California indoor-outdoor courtyard models of Irving Gill and Schindler. We shared communal space, creating a pathway to private yards and front doors. All units cross-ventilate and all have generous outdoor spaces. Next. So, next. So that's the line of the development that will be in front. So what really counts here is the space that happens behind this front, which is interesting because normally everyone's worried about the face. In this project, it's about the space between. Next. So moving through, next, to the shared courtyard, and the illusion of single-family houses that you create on the podium to the parking garage as you dig into the hillside. No piece of the property is wasted. All of the side yards become positive outdoor space for units. Next. You kind of get the idea. Next. So now we're going to move on to another sort of group of buildings. Next. Libraries. So the neighborhood library has got to be the most emblematic of the idea of a community resource, offering opportunity for all. With access to knowledge and hard work, everyone gets a foot up. Next. So welcome to Pittsburgh, PA. And we had a client, the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh, on and off for 20 years. They believe that programs for children and families bring back disinvested neighborhoods. The museum, which we designed, integrates an abandoned planetarium. That's what we just passed over. The park that you saw between was designed by Andrea Cochran and took over and transformed an abandoned plaza. And that brings us to where the camera stops at the Allegheny Free Library, which you probably guessed had been shuttered for years. Next. The library was the first of the Carnegie libraries commissioned through an endowment set up by steel magnate and industrialist Andrew Carnegie, an immigrant to the US who believed access to knowledge, hard work, and merit got you places. That's an interesting idea. We could put that up as a platform during this election. What do you think? Okay, I'm going on. This is easily diverted in this kind of political place. Okay, so next. At that time, books were the pathway to knowledge. The earliest neighborhood libraries, like this one, housed books in closed structural stacks. Books were expensive, protected, and revered. Next. Reading rooms were quiet, serious places where people sat upright, clearly, and women had their own reading room to the side over there. I didn't want to be disturbed by those grotesque gentlemen. Fast forward 100 years, and the library was empty and distressed, and the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh saw it as a resource to expand programming. Next. They reinvented the library as a different kind of community resource, the Museum Lab. It's an ambitious project for 10 to 14-year-olds, which includes studios for art, technology, and fabrication, a charter middle school for 140 kids, partners like Carnegie Mellon and the University of Pittsburgh, who provide access to innovative technologies. They are also analyzing, that is, the universities are analyzing, the potential of the collaboration between an informal learning environment, a museum, and a formal learning environment, a school, and what the possibilities could be for infusing new ideas about learning. The hope is to create a new paradigm for learning. So our job is a little simpler, thank God, because reinventing the world I'm going to leave to Rem Koolhaas, and to the people at the Children's Museum. So we set about repurposing the library for teen programs, offering access to tool and tech more so than books as the pathway to knowledge. So here are the plans. We didn't do a lot. We basically sort of stripped things back. So the main floor has the museum, lab studios, and workshops. The upper level where the green is the home base for Manchester Academic Charter School, the middle school, and it has a front door off that blue space, which is a new gathering space that's made in the Lightwell, and has a mezzanine. It's a double height space that allows access to another gathering space. The elevator was pushed from the front of the building to the back of the building so it could catch all floors. Basically, it's accessible. We got a bonus kind of winter house in the bargain. The little blue space over there on that first floor is the, what is that? Oh yeah, that was where the structural stacks were and we filled in the floor. Next. So this kind of maybe shows it a little clearer. The ground floor is for the partner educators. That first floor, which is the entry level and half a level up, is the museum lab's main floor, then the added gathering space in the Lightwell, and beyond that, the charter school. Next. Oh, this is a good part. So anyone else, okay, admit it. Who watches HGTV because they like makeovers? I even like the Property Brothers, as idiotic as they are. But it's always fun to see something go from a piece of shit to another piece of shit. It's good. So the hope was to reinstate the quality of the historic building that had been hidden by the 60s renovation. This was the careless 60s renovation here on the left. Pretty amazing. That's what was underneath it. And this is what we start to uncover as we're looking to work out what to do. And I'm looking for that piece again. So what you're seeing here is plumbing pipes, because there's an equally beautiful space above this that they decided to put bathrooms in as part of the renovation. I'll show you it in a minute. But as they pulled the plaster back, we thought that the capitals were there, but they'd been sliced through, completely sliced through. Next. Ta-da, the reveal. Better than the Property Brothers. In the end, to get to a stable surface, given the crumbling mortar and sliced capitals, we had to strip back to the structural underpinnings, load-bearing brick and steel armature. These were poetic and a fitting backdrop for a program that looked at how things are made in a building endowed by a steel magnet. We embraced the idea of a beautiful ruin, with a helpful endorsement from Paula Scher from Pentagram. She came on a really good day when everyone was like, oh, will we, won't we, will we, won't we? And she just said, wow, it's a great idea. It also helped that there was not enough money to reinstate the original plaster in a meaningful way. Behind the desk, you see a perf metal screen to the new stair. That was made from salvaged structural book stacks, flooring. And then go to the next image. The Children's Museum also commissioned art and found art, and some of it was site-specific, and we'll come to that too. Next. So this is the next makeover photo. So this is what they'd done to this fantastic, this is where you went to get your book, collected from. What do you call that desk? And it should have looked like that, but in the middle, and as we start pulling things away, we see we've got the same situation as we have in the lobby. This was a reveal and make a decision kind of project, and it wasn't in a good way. And again, next. To get it where it needed to go, it had to go down to the bones. So this is as built with the fabulous Freeland Buck installation that was commissioned by the museum that evokes the long-gone Tiffany skylight. The ghost of the original fireplace is fabricated from the remaining structural stack flooring. That piece is really beautiful. So we needed rules of engagement. So we declared things. We declared preservation areas. The messy stuff, the bones. Next, please. This stuff. But there were gashes where ducks had been run through things. So they got plastered over, but that's as much as we could do. We needed to make it safe. We needed to encapsulate the lead paint. that kind of thing, and then we stopped. Then we needed another kind of space, which we called faux restoration areas, where the surface was cleaned up and paint extended to camouflage needed modern interventions like insulation to exterior walls. So we could paint that out, group it with some other ornament, and sort of give it a different kind of sensibility. This is part of the first exhibit that was made in that original archway. The ceramicist was making a big dragon with the kids. It's kind of cool, but we deliberately kept the paint line off the corners of things so that the strategy was made clear. The building did well with its insulation and its LEED gold. Next. So looking back from that location through to the other end where some more of the labs are. Next. And back towards the painting studio that you saw. Next. This is actually part of an addition to the library that was done in the 20s, and we didn't take as much care in terms of where we made decisions on it, but we still tried to give it some integrity. Next. So now we're going upstairs. So a key design strategy for us was to reintroduce light into the building. We achieved that by restoring sealed window openings and enhanced it by adding the skylit second floor gathering space. So the gathering space is in this zone here. What you're looking at here is a big window that had been sealed off because that's where the bathrooms were, right? Remember the bathrooms? This was how you got through the building by staircase. This is the window uncovered when the bathrooms were removed. And this is the front face of that. So this is what it is now. Next. It's our own little Italian villa in Pittsburgh, PA. The chairs, we went hunting around in the storage of the public library, found the Panton chairs, and they said, oh, we don't want them, you can have them. So we took them. We opened up the arches where the new floor takes you into that gathering space. Next. And the clerestory lighting was added along the sides. I'm sorry for people in the middle, but I can only kind of flip one screen at a time. So there's clerestory lighting here, and there's glass floors here, and that's how come people get to walk on top of Freeland Buck's installation, which is kind of cool. And the light in there, again, is this kind of ethereal sort of winter light, great in a place like Pittsburgh. Next. Again, this is in the addition to the original library that was done in the 20s, and this is the home base for the school. More conventional in its approach, but in its approach to learning, they're doing project-based learning, and it's pretty interesting. They hadn't moved in, as you can probably tell there. Next. And then the assembly hall, which is on the school was accessed from the left, if I had my head in gear, and the assembly hall is accessed from that mezzanine on the right. Next. So going downstairs, the school's behind us. This is the assembly hall up here. And this is a flexible space, that gathering space, and the chairs sit on the wall. As I've just learned, they do at the Architectural League. Next. Looking back the other way through the arches that were opened up and the mezzanine gallery that was added. Next. And then the final reveal. This is the vestibule that was completely plastered, and they were poking some holes for some electrical, and they started to see the terracotta, and we all ganged up on the project manager and got the plaster removed. So that's the museum lab in Pittsburgh, PA. Next. Karen's taking notes. She's going to ask questions, and they're going to be difficult questions. And I'm going to give nonchalant answers. Nowadays, a neighborhood library is much more informal than in Carnegie's day. Reaching the public in the digital age means creating social energy and offering choice, as much as it does offering books. Oh, you've skipped one ahead, which is great. It got built in a 6-acre city park that we designed many years earlier. with the community. The work had reconnected the predominantly minority neighborhood to the north to the then gentrifying and now fully gentrified single-family houses to the south, and taken back the gang turf between. We built trust through that, and we were really pleased to be invited back to work with them again. Next. This time for the making of the library. So a library at this point needs to be at the center of things. So this is the kind of list that the community asked for. They had pushed for the library to be in the park, and they stayed involved. They wanted an educational resource to help eliminate a lagging student achievement gap in their minority community. They wanted it to be family-friendly, not so quiet, and at the center of things. The more activities in immediate relationship, the more choice, and the more families likely to include a visit to the library in a set of activities. They asked for a living room in the park. Next. But that wasn't enough. They also told us that we couldn't take away any usable green space, so we couldn't push into this green part. There's a farmers market plaza here, some other indoor program buildings here. So what we did is we jumped the fire lane, which serves as a pedestrian route on a daily basis between north and south. Next. Splitting the community room off the west of the fire lane became an opportunity to highlight the pedestrian access and essentially give more muscle to the building, because it was a tiny little building. It's only 7,500 square feet, and some of that community, God bless them, didn't really want anyone from outside of their particular neighborhood to come in. So we felt it was our duty to give it a little push in the ribs. So that gave us a way of making the building appear to be larger and also highlight that pedestrian walkway. Next. So there's the roof, and the design of the building is really about an integrated design approach to daylight harvesting. That's its technical term. It was really about how you would shape the space so it was aspirational, it would make the place feel like it glowed with light. The other benefit you have when you bring light inside is, okay, how many of you are doing buildings with glass facades when you've done the renderings, and the renderings show that you can see everything inside? And you get out into the field, and because of the energy requirements, the glass is tinted, and you can't get that at all. You're basically a black box. The answer is to bring light from inside as well to help. Also, if you can get them to raise the budget to get better glass, which we never do, that helps too. But nevertheless, bringing light from inside increases visibility in, and it actually reduces glare. Yeah, and it's a LEED Platinum building. We do a lot of them, but it's California. You guys should try harder. Come on. It was partly to do with the daylight harvesting, partly to do with some innovative water treatment and the on-site renewable, but it was also a breakthrough project. It was the first public building in the county to use grey water to flush toilets. And I need you to know that they had to put a sign up that said dogs should not drink from the bowl. It was a small price to pay. Well, dogs don't read usually, you know. I mean, your dog is smart, but not everybody else's dog. Next. So I'm just kind of walking you through next. We can do another next. So the photovoltaics create great patterns. Next. Next. And then there's sort of temporal elements. We have a sort of a philosophy in the office that things shouldn't be perfect. Because when it's perfect, you don't feel like you should touch it, you should use it. And a little bit of imperfection is good. These little awnings are sort of our nod to the farmers market, sort of improvised temporal structures where people sell your fruit and vegetables to you. Next. Inside. Keep going, next. The ceiling. Next. That's acoustic plaster, and it works pretty well, except the library's been overly popular, and now they're complaining that they have too many people and too much noise. So as I said to Nader, I don't think it matters if things don't function perfectly. I think part of the energy of that noise is actually attracting more people. Otherwise, if it was too noisy, people would be staying away. And you can see here next, strong connection, visibility outside, next. The farmer's market, and the loose sort of happening at the front door, next. the computer area. Next. View out to the playing fields. I think I'm stating the obvious, but it's better than saying next. Next. Instagram, to verify that people actually use the building. Next. And the end of the day. So I've got one more project to show you, if you'd like to go to the next slide, which is a student pavilion at Melbourne University. Nader beat me there. He actually designed the new architecture school where Hank and I went to school. I'm not saying that he's that old. He replaced the architecture school where we went to school. And if you could go back to the slide before, I just want to give the lay of the land. So the student precinct, the architecture school is somewhere up here and is very nice. This is Swanston Street, the main drag that takes you down to the city, and the trams go along there. There's a new subway stop happening here. The university has a population of about 52,000 students and growing. Students generally live off campus, have limited access to study and recreational space. And the amenity offered on campus was kind of miserable. The pavilion is part of the ambitious 250,000 square foot precinct, which is planned to improve the on-campus student experience. I think that's what you meant to say at a university. Is that what they say here? It's the student experience? Yeah, it's a lovely term. The precinct will offer arts and culture venues, student study spaces, recreation, and social amenities and food. So we'll keep going. Next. So the project came about as a sort of a competition, and our group sort of went in on this idea of a diversity procurement model, which brought firms with varied backgrounds and interests together to mirror the diversity of the student body. Building design is individual, as you would expect in a diversity model, and site design is seen as collective. The resulting unifying landscape rolls through the site. It foregrounds the contribution of Indigenous people by making the pre-colonial geography visible. And what I need to say, but it's a whole other discussion, is they're doing a lot more in Australia to make Indigenous peoples visible than they are here. And it's part of the way any acknowledgement of an event starts, is acknowledgement of the people who are caretakers of the land. I can't remember the exact wording. And I think over the generation, our children, well, my grandchildren, let's face it, our grandchildren will take it as normal that Indigenous people have a starring role in the history of the country. Next. So we got the student pavilion, which was one of the two new buildings. Arts and culture was the other one. And I think they gave us the student building because it's the least institutional of the precinct programs. It's the informal neighborhood building, and we're known for that. It has a food hall, a rooftop for events and relaxation, study space, and yes, it has a library. I told you it would have a library. It's a library where you're not allowed to study, but more of the library in a second. If you would go to the next slide. There it is. The Rowden White Library is the place you would go to get stoned and listen to records. The turntables are still there, and I hold a deep affection for this library since we were students. It's really nice to give it a new home. And below the food, you can see it's a sort of a loose connection to outside and the rooftop. I sort of made clear we needed something to hold all these pieces together, and that was achieved next by threading together a set of precast concrete columns that extend through the building. Now, what's wonderful about Australia, after my big talk about wood frame construction, is they build in concrete, and they build really well in concrete, and it's really cheap, and if some of the sustainability people want to take me on, go for it. It's so much fun to be using concrete, I cannot tell you. So that's the kind of strategy. Next. From the north and the south, it's pretty innocuous. Next. But from the east and west, it takes on more vitality. And there's also a legacy that it's building on of brutalist buildings from the 60s that are around that area of the campus. Next. So we added a series of facade connection system that would hold glass next, and wood panels, until we got it just right so that the energy performance was correct and the degree of visibility would work, and it was in budget. Next. There's the plans. You can see how the 2 and 3 floors connect each other internally. And what I guess I forgot to tell earlier when we were looking at that picture, the little diagram, is how important that stair is on the outside. The stair on the outside was to give legibility to everyone that this was about an entitlement to use this space. Not just, we'd like you to come, but you're entitled to use this space, all the damn levels of it. And so here is kind of next. Well, we have to do the quieter information first, and you'll get the big picture a little later. But the materiality of the building, I didn't mean to say materiality because I think it's a stupid word. The materials of the building responded to feedback that the university had got from student surveys. They wanted more natural settings in a very urban campus. They wanted more visibility of sustainable materials, and they wanted more visibility of environmental stewardship. That can be seen by renewables on the roof, the PVs, but it's also for a very active and aggressive strategy to reduce carbon footprint, well below what they normally do in Australia, and it's all got brought home even more now since the fires. Next, so this is looking sort of straight at it. You see the food hall, the double height spaces in the middle, and then the sort of rooftop, which is your, if you're in Australia, it would be your wealthy relative's beach house on the roof. Next. And that's the stair that I was talking about earlier, that invites you to go all levels. We have an interior fire stair, but not much effort is put into that. Next. The connection to arts and culture on the upper level, taking you to the double height space. Next. The environmental part. There's a mixed mode on the ground floor, mixed mode on the top floor, and more comfortable comfort level space for the study and library. And you're kind of moving inside, and you can see what the columns are starting to do as they dance around. Next. Moving in. Next. The stair to upstairs, and somebody's going to realize that that deck halfway up isn't accessible. This is the design development rendering, and we didn't get away with that. We thought that Australia wasn't watching, but they were watching. And could you just go back one? So that you're seeing that and then looking down from above. Next. So that is my last slide, and it's looking, it's the south elevation, which is the shady elevation there. And it kind of makes me nostalgic because they're going to plant a whole lot more eucalyptus trees there. They have some beautiful citriadoras already. And that landscape, which is only sort of very etchily sort of described at this point, will be extraordinary. So thank you for letting me share the work. Look forward to talking to you about it. And go on, Karen, ask your terrible questions.
I'm going to ask some very softball questions just to get a little conversation going, and then hopefully we'll have some questions from the audience. One of the things that I'm quite fascinated by are your clients. Mm-hmm. I mean, you work for people for a very long time in some cases. Mm-hmm. How come that is?
I was going to say because they like us, but that's not a very good reason. I think it's actually it's not because of that. It's because we're willing to argue with them. We're willing to ask a question they haven't asked, and willing to hear that maybe they've got an idea that we hadn't thought of. And I'll jump on any idea presented by anybody. So the idea of community meetings, for example, they don't bother me. There's always some idiot there who says, you can't do that, and that's a stupid idea. And then if you wait long enough, there's always someone who gets up and says, but you know what I really like? It's this. And while you have that dialogue happening, you feel the energy of the community taking ownership of what it is they want. And that's pretty cool. Now, not all of these encounters go swimmingly well. Anyone who's worked in that sector knows. But clients like the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh are extraordinary thinkers. And they said they came back to us because they like thinking with us.
But that was a relationship, I think, of multiple decades. Is that correct?
It's Mark's fault. Mark Robbins put us on a list for an invited competition at the NEA, which we pulled off, and we worked with Jane. That first museum happened over 9/11. During it, they cut the budget and said, keep going. It's like, oh, great. And we had a big argument, as Jane and I do every so often. But there was a resolution. It was all about getting the project better and getting it done, because she had severe difficulties because you couldn't raise money at that time. So what we did is we pooled resources with an artist, Ned Kahn. He took his art budget, and we simplified the exterior envelope of the building and featured his idea about things that captured the wind, which was a great idea about discovery. He does these pixelated things that pivot in the wind. It's commonplace now, but it was quite new at that time, and that's how we solved the budget problem.
Do you think that you listen better than other architects, or do you think that you do something?
People who know me know I don't listen. What's really weird is I may not appear to listen, but I do hear. And often it's not what's said. Actually, I'm better at listening what's not said than listening at what is said, because often what's said is what they think you want to hear. And you can get a cue from things, and I like to look for those cues, or an anecdote that somebody says to you about how something should be, and don't ask me for the anecdote because I can't think of anything right this second. And that will be the cue that I've missed something and that we could go about it another way.
And how did you learn how to do that?
I come from a really argumentative Jewish family. There was no stopping them.
So it's a Talmudic process.
It's a Talmudic training, yeah.
Okay.
Over dinner every day.
One of the things you talked about at the beginning is the sticky spaces. You talked about it in relationship to housing. But I think that the theme of the sticky spaces kind of runs through all of the projects, and that if you were to have a style, it would be
sticky.
It would be about the sticky. So maybe you could talk about what makes a sticky space successful or not successful. How do you know when it's going to work?
It's still too intuitive for my liking. So we argue about it, but first of all, you can never make a building where people feel welcome, where it's too perfect, which is that one thing, that you give everything away at once, because it's like wham, and there's no connection made. It's really important to give cues that people feel welcome. So transparency is a big one that we all know about, right? So if you can see in, you feel like, I know how to negotiate that space. But that doesn't mean you don't want a sense of discovery. So it's not one or the other, but it's constructing a collection of ideas together. Now, I've said the other thing is it should look easy. It should look like the architect did it easily. You're not doing people a favor. You're not trying to do anything so fantastic that they're the little person in the big idea. You want to be the little person with them. That sounds condescending, and I don't mean it that way. You want to be one of them. And I think that idea had come from my father, the great arguer, who was a really interesting guy. He didn't understand what Hank and I were doing at all. There's people who knew him who were nodding their head. He had no clue what we were doing. The old story goes, when he came to our house, which is not all that outrageous, he told us traditional houses sell better. So that was his bent.
That's a real father's comment.
It is a real father. So I've always kind of wanted to make a place where if Dad came in, he wouldn't feel uncomfortable. But others would have things to find beyond more than what my dad would look for.
So it should be interesting enough, but not alienating.
Yeah, well, I don't think being challenging is a bad thing. I mean, I'm not talking about architecture of timidity because you don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I think it's architecture of generosity. And it's a different thing than intimidating. It's about, it can be big, it can be bold, it can be blustery, but you've got ways for people to hook in that isn't about being told what you're meant to see and what you're meant to think. And so Frank Lloyd Wright, who's in the news a little bit lately with the Taliesin School and everything, he's a control freak. I don't think Frank Lloyd Wright buildings are the kind of buildings that I want to do at this point in time. They're beautiful. I love them. But they don't make people feel in charge of their space.
Because there's one way through them?
There's one way, there's a right way, and it will be this way, and then you'll turn that way, and this will be set up. I mean, Taliesin out in Arizona is a much looser kind of place. But the stuff in Chicago and earlier is a much more uptight stuff. So I'm not criticizing Mr. Wright. Far be it from me to do that, but I think it's important to talk about what it is to create space that is generous and inviting.
And generous and inviting to people who you're making assumptions about how they live.
I'm not making assumptions about how they live. I have no idea. I just know if it's a space that I like to go into, that's a good starting point. If I don't like it, I don't want to go there. I love to be surprised. I mean, I would love to be able to build humor into the buildings. I tried a studio doing that. It's really hard for humor to last after the first viewing of whatever it is you've entered, right?
What do you mean by humor in a building? Give me an example of humor in a building.
So if you make a joke, you can tell a joke more than once. When you see a joke in a building, and the students had done these outrageous, it was at SciArc Studio, and they had done these outrageous buildings, you looked at it the first time, it was like, oh wow, that is so funny, that is so whimsical. And by the second time, it was like, oh, it's so boorish, you know. There's one read, here's the read, and I've got the punchline, and move on. So humor doesn't translate very well to permanent built environment. Pop-up is good, but I don't think you can keep you can't keep joy in that way, in a jokey way.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that humor in architecture just makes me think of cartoon, you know, it makes me think of Disney buildings, not of actual...
Well, so but Disney buildings aren't funny, are they?
Well, there's an attempt to be funny, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, they're not funny. They're not funny.
They're not
okay,
funny,
we're at that little cul-de-sac there.
Okay, sorry, Karen.
It's okay. Let's open it up to the audience, see if anyone else has a question. Do you want to go up to the microphone so that everyone else can hear you?
Yeah, it's just because I very much appreciated your designs and cross-section. So I wanted to ask you about that because
I just wanted to say that I appreciated always that your projects seemed to be designed in cross-section. And I see that over and over again when you show the work, even today. So I thought if you could comment on how you work, and do you work in cross-section as a means to help generate the plan and make those sticky spaces actually work?
So it's about sequence of space, and the only way to actually work out sequence of space is section. Plus, you understand, if you're trained at a certain point in time, your shorthand is things like sections and plans. So we don't see sections and plans much anymore because that's not how people are communicating ideas to each other. But for a generation, well, maybe we're the last 10, maybe there's 10 years after us. You know, the people older than 50 were still trained to think that way. But it's moved from there. You may get the same result, but it will be derived in a different way. I'm guessing Nader could talk more about that and how people think differently by the means that they communicate ideas. But for us, it was cross-section and plan. And so we did what we did. I mean, if you want to see a really good section, have a look at the Patcals from Canada. Or actually, Grant Morani said to go and have a look at the exhibition at the Morgan Library, LeCue, thank you, yeah, my Australian accent. But that stuff is incredible. You want a section? Oh, that's a dream section. But thank you.
Do you think it's harder to be an architect now than when you started, or the other way around?
Oh, it's much harder now.
Why?
Have you seen a drawing set lately? It's like the preposterous amount of busy work we do to document ideas that we could have put out there so much faster before. And with all of the potential and power of the tools that could help you do that, the legal system comes in and completely complicates it and wastes a lot of our time and energy. I don't think it gives us better buildings because we cover our asses with 400 drawings. So what gives us better buildings is a good relationship with contractors, trust, and you know, it's not that you can't have, that you don't need the drawings, but a set that I would have had to do in the 90s would look like that. That same set now would look like that if I'm using paper as a measure, which is already outmoded. See, look, this is going nowhere. I'm stuck in the past.
Any other questions?
So clearly you guys spend a lot of time engaging the community in these projects. Can you talk a little bit more about the relationship you had to build with the developer, specifically on like the affordable housing project?
So people expect that your relationship with affordable housing means that you go and commune with the residents as if you know, there's a group of people that you should talk with separately and have individual conversations. If you don't do that with market rate residents, you don't really need to do that with affordable housing residents. If you do post-occupancy evaluation, if you do some observation, and you rely on the developers of affordable housing who know who lives there and know what they need. So you have to trust them not to be stupid. And they're not. I mean, matter of fact, they're really smart. And so it's trying to keep their vision together with all of the parameters that make any kind of formal move in affordable housing difficult to achieve. And that's why I spent the time on the ARROYO. It's not a genius project, but at least it's still with every project, and we think this is really important, that each project has to explore a little. So that was what we were doing there with some of the formal aspects. But people want the same thing. They want to be part of a community, whether it's a small household or it's a bigger community of people that share a building. And if you proceed from that basis, you're doing okay. And the feedback we get is funny. So on affordable housing, one of the projects, we were really, you know, pissed that we had put so much space into a bathroom to meet ADA requirements. And we spoke to one of the residents, and he said, oh, he loves the bathroom. He feels like he's at a really expensive hotel. So, I mean, I'm not sure what's right and wrong anymore in terms of that. But that's one of those invisible cues that you get, right? Which is not by not listening, because I'm basically saying I'm not listening, but then hearing the idea of what the issue of self-worth is in the way people enjoy where they live or stabilize where they live.
You said you didn't get to play around with the plans as much as you would like. What would change? What would allow you to do that?
Time. I think the DNA of a project is in a plan, and then the section evolves from that. But I don't know, any of the students here do work from a plan? I doubt it. None of the students I've taught in the last 15 years use a plan as a starting point. Yeah, whoa. Oh, I have to come and watch one day.
Yes.
Hi. This is sort of along the line of the last question. So a lot of you do the housing typologies that you work on work sort of best in LA or in warm weather climates. I was just wondering if you've given much thought of how that can be translated to New York or...
More insulation.
I mean, can these sticky spaces in housing typologies be interior or, I mean, people in New York are maybe more...
Well, so this is the argument that architecture is place-based, and I think it is. I think we take our cues from the sensibility of a place and the materials available, but I don't really know how to answer that question, because I guess what you're doing is you're applying the same principles, but the place makes them different, right? Because you have to deal with whatever that weird planning code is, or whatever that energy condition is, so that you're responsible. We're doing a house in Shelter Island, which is the first New York project we've done. The projects in Pittsburgh, I didn't feel I had to change the way I thought to approach them. The part in Pittsburgh that's tricky is that they love their past. And to get them to be free of their past as well as appreciate their past it takes some finesse. So it was pretty brave of the Children's Museum to have trust in the concept. And Jane and her staff, Anne and Chris and the others, they were pretty amazing. Once we embarked on it, they were better at telling the story of what we were doing than we were. So I think it's about people and it's about place. That's a very airy-fairy California answer for you.
Gwen?
Hi, Gwen.
Hi, Julie. You're one of the best firms I've ever known in terms of bringing out people's ideas.
Her daughter is married to my son, so she has to say stuff like that.
So one of the things that's really always fascinated me in that is that you elicit ideas from people about what they want that help you define what you want to do. It's not as if you just give them what they want, but you actually make things with that. But there have got to be some tricks that you use. You don't start it over every time. So what are some things that you've used, some phrases that you use, some questions you've used that might be useful for the rest of us to adopt?
Well, this gets to teamwork. I am terrified of the blank page. I would much prefer a confined site to the open field. So that's the starting point. And I have people like Hank around and Nathan around and Brian around who are fearless about the empty field. So I'm not usually the first person to make the mark. And then it's a sort of a back and forth. It's like that kitchen table from my youth, happening all over again in a different way, and we sort of work through it. Some things come very slowly. We're working on affordable housing adjacent to a subway station in LA at Vermont and Santa Monica, and how to get this project to energize the train station but still have a sense of identity by itself is proving really tricky. And we get some of the bones right, and then we go round and back, and sometimes I think actually the answer to your question is to have time to step away and then look back and not be looking with a point of view in mind, but just say, oh, here it is, what is it telling
To
you?
try to be the editor of your own project in a way.
Yeah, and I think probably I'm the office editor, if anyone is. Yeah. It doesn't get me brownie points with everybody in the office.
Yeah. It's hard to go from author to editor and back again.
Well, I'm not the author anymore. I'm more of a creative director than I am an author. And we have a great team of people. Nathan has been an incredible add as a design partner, and Brian has always done wonderful work. And and then the next generation, we've got. I'll name everyone in the office if you let me, but I'll stop. But I think that's really important, and we have a fairly free-spirited thing. You can walk past any desk and say anything you want, and and it's somewhat Australian. It's fairly blunt. It's like, oh, that looks like shit. Can we fix that? And that's not a criticism of you. That's an issue that the work needs to be looked at again.
Okay. Grant?
Uh-oh.
Yeah. This is
Julie, you've been away from Australia for some decades now. And this is
As
your
long
first-
as you have.
I know, but this is your first project back in
Yeah.
Melbourne. So what are some of the joys, some of the things that the anger you may have about some places or people or?
The Australian thing has been fantastic. There are people that we're teamed up with who are thinking really great and exuberant thoughts. And the Australian architects are fearless. Like, they're fearless to the point of, like, they're crazy. And that's a fantastic validation of architecture as value. Australia likes its architects. That's great. They have some strange regulations. So in a university, you hit this, Nadej, the 6-foot high railing height on upper levels. So to integrate that into your design so it doesn't look like you're making a prison is really hard. And that building that you see there on the other side, there's netting that goes up, which is a trick we took from him. There's wood trellis works and vines that try and hide the idea that you're being held in. It's very tricky. But they also do more performance-based design than here. So the code there allows you to do a lot more than the code here. Those are the biggest differences. And the sun comes from the right direction, so, what more could you want?
After all these years in California, you haven't learned.
Well, so the problem is, I don't know if you have the same problem, Grant. I have to look at my hand to work out which side I'm meant to drive on the street. Should I look this way or that way to cross the road? Where's the sun coming from? It's a real problem having two sets of universes that you have to hold.
Right.
And then there's the metric in feet and inches, which is another lovely complication.
Okay. On life's complications, I think we'll call it a night. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.